Welcome, Laura.
Thanks.
How are you enjoying Philadelphia?
I am enjoying it. I went to the Mutter Museum yesterday after I got in town, and then today I went to the Eastern Penitentiary.
You've done the darker sides of
Yes,
Philly tour.
it's what I'm into.
And you were saying, because you've probably been to Philadelphia numerous times with your bands and things, but this is the first time you said you got to actually spend some
Yes,
time?
I've only been here on tour, so it means I've spent less than 24 hours in town at a time. But I've been here many times over the last 30 years.
You have to imagine it's been a lot. So.
Yes, but never had time to actually go beyond the area around the Trocadero. Like, I made it into Chinatown, and I bought some bowls. And I went to some restaurants, different times, but that's it.
Well, welcome to Philly, welcome to Drexel. I hope we're gonna talk a lot about your career in different facets today. So just welcome and thank you everyone for coming out. Hopefully you enjoy this, and there will be time for questions at the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them at the end. But let's start over. Let's start kind of at the beginning, not the very beginning, not like not your immediate upbringing, but your musical upbringing. And when did you first start to develop essentially your own taste in music, and where did that kind of come from?
It's a good question. The early signs were bad. I think the first music I ever bought for myself was a 7-inch single. Nobody will know what this is in this room probably, but of Music Box Dancer, which was a instrumental sort of interpretation of classical music that was on popular radio in like 1978. And I was like, yes, this is what I want.
And so where did you even hear, but was it on the radio? Where did you even hear
I heard it on the radio, yeah, in the car probably. And it was goofy, and I liked it.
And you were probably in middle school,
I was
earlier?
Maybe in 5th grade or something.
Okay,
Fourth grade, 5th grade.
And so then at some point you started to get into more underground music.
Like so the Close Encounters soundtrack?
Maybe, yeah. So then it was Close Encounters.
And then the Black Stallion soundtrack. So cool.
So you had the soundtrack era, and then
Yes.
so I guess that's the question. What was there a sort of a key catalyst or moment that transitioned you from that to the underground, or was there a gateway, or did you just sort of fall into it, or?
Okay, I think there were a couple factors that drew me into the underground, or three. One, I felt like an outsider. I felt like I didn't belong with everybody else. I felt different. And so when I first saw Adam and the Ants on the television, because I lived in Atlanta when cable first started. If you can imagine that, you probably can't. Ted Turner started cable TV in Atlanta, and he was desperate for content, so there was all this stuff that they would play over and over again. And I saw this show, like it was, maybe it was called Night Flight or something, or maybe not. That might have not been that. But there was a live performance of Adam and the Ants during the Kings of the Wild Frontier era. They had this elaborate set that looked like a pirate ship, and they were all in like crazy makeup, totally glammed out, and I was just like, I was probably 13, and I was just like, that is what I want to be. That is it. It appealed to my sense of otherness and not belonging. And around the same time, I met my best friend, Dia, whose brother, Greg, had an amazing record collection. And he was an excellent, host. He introduced us to all kinds of awesome music. And, I can thank him for it, as well as Ted Turner.
No, it's funny you mentioned Ted Turner in the early days of cable, because for me personally too, one of the most formative things for getting me into underground music was a channel in Philly called No, it wasn't UPN. It used to be called Channel 57 before it was UPN. And really late at night, they would show music videos. And I didn't have MTV. And this is the only time I could see music videos, but they were only pulling in like the weirdest. They weren't getting the cool videos, and so I was only seeing these really weird underground
The cool videos or the
Well,
weird videos? Like
they were
getting the cool videos.
They were the cool videos, but they weren't the ones they weren't the ones I actually wanted at the time, which was the popular ones I could talk to the kids at school about.
Like which ones?
I wasn't getting like the Counting Crows videos and the live videos. Yeah, I was getting like Pulp and things like that before they were coming to the U.S. and weird stuff. But I would tape it and I would watch it the next morning, and that was my like, wow, there's music videos.
Yeah.
It was really formative for me, and then I was going to record stores and asking for these things that I thought were normal, and then they were like, well, we don't have that, and it was a very weird transition. So it's interesting you mentioned that cable show, because cable in the early days was probably also just as like out there.
It was totally out there. There was also like all this other stuff they were showing, like Japanese animated, Japanese cartoons that were overdubbed with, or no, they weren't even overdubbed. They just had like subtitles at the bottom. And those were incredible and totally subversive and weird.
Yeah, this Channel 57, I was watching MASH, but this was like 20 years after MASH. I was watching like MASH and like all Matlock and All in the Family, these weird shows. They were awesome, though. I feel like but I don't want to go. This is only the first question I want to ask you.
But wait, I also have to give credit to in Atlanta. There was a great college radio station that I listened to all the time on this little, tiny clock radio that I would park my little cassette recorder next to. They were just, like this big. Some of you guys might not know about these, but it was how we did cassettes back in the old days. It played them and also recorded them, and I would put my cassette recorder next to the radio, and whenever a good song came on, I would push the two buttons, clunk, and like record the good song, because it didn't occur to me that I could possibly ever have the money to go and buy these things that I liked myself. And then the next year I figured it out after I started working at Murdoch's Fudge and and was able to go to the record store at the mall. And then there was this awesome dude who worked at the record store at the mall who was not creepy at all and was just like, here's what you need to hear, kid. And he, talked me into buying a New Order 12-inch that changed my life.
It's so funny. I'm about at least a generation, hopefully not too many, past you, and I had such a similar experience, but actually with your label, which segues in so well, is I was looking for that weird stuff, and I'd also say, do you have like the Black Album by Metallica or something, or do you have Nevermind by Nirvana? And the person at the record store at Dollars for Discs in Narberth said, well, you might like this band, Archers of Loaf. They have this, this record like VV, and
they rock too.
And they rock too, and you might. And I checked them out, and it was this. I wasn't even thinking about the underground at the time. It was just like, here's just a band, and it's maybe what you're saying with Archers, with Adam and the Ants, which is so interesting. It was like I don't think you were thinking about the underground, but it was like, here's this band, and it's different. And then I feel like maybe that's what you're saying started your journey. And then at some point it sounded like you wanted to actually play music. So what was the next? What was the next sort of move as far as playing music? Like, when did you pick up an instrument? Was bass your first instrument? How did that come about?
Well, this sort of jumps right over the part where I started going to shows.
Okay, let's go back a second.
Because I would never have started playing music if I hadn't started going to punk rock shows or going to shows at all and seeing people actually playing in person, and that blowing my mind. I have this confusion over whether the first concert I saw was Prince and the Revolution on the Purple Rain tour, or the Bad Brains at the Metroplex with Neon Christ opening. Like, it was around the same time, but both of them blew my mind, and particularly at the Metroplex show with the Bad Brains, I remember just standing there and being overwhelmed and it just not making any sense. Like, it was a kind of music that I didn't listen to normally. And at that time, like now when I hear the Bad Brains, it's almost like poppy and melodic to me. But back then, it felt so chaotic and weird and out there that like it was blowing my mind. Like I didn't understand how this was even music. Like, are they playing together? I have no idea. Someone's screaming. It sounds crazy, but it's kind of fun. And it's really loud.
So how'd you hear about, so the Prince and the Revolution show makes a lot of sense that it would have gotten to you. How did you hear about the Bad Brains show?
Greg Bicchetti.
Was it the record store? Or the
No,
friend, or-
the brother of my friend. He
Oh,
took us. He took me and Dia to see them.
And at the time, did it feel like a normal activity, or do you realize you were doing something?
It
that
felt
was like,
really subversive because it also felt like it was in a squat. It felt like it was in some old office building, and they had set up a band to play in it, but it was not legit. They were on the floor. I couldn't even see them because there were people standing in front of me, and there's no way I was getting in front because there were also people swirling around, and you know, it was crazy.
You know, I have such a similar feeling at my first show, which would have been 10 something years later, of like, wow, this is so. Is this illegal? Is this legal?
Yeah.
Is this like? But I really, there's something very attractive about it. It might have been also feeling a bit of an outsider, or just
Right.
like, were you instantly attracted to it also? Or were you a little bit like, I don't want to do this
I was a
again?
little scared at first, but I'm glad that I had both experiences around the same time. The like mega stadium where Prince was this big, and then also this thing where these people were really close to me, but I couldn't see them. Just to have both ends of this spectrum in what you could experience at a live show, but it was not right away that I thought, oh, I want to do that. It was probably, let's see, maybe 10 years later when I got around to playing myself. And in the meantime, I kept going to punk rock shows, and a lot of it was just for the social thing. Because when you're in high school, what do you have to do besides go and just hang out somewhere with your friends in the parking lot? If you don't have money, maybe you'll go into the show if you do have money, and if it's a band you really want to see. But so I just hung out at shows whenever I had the time.
Technical difficulties. Double technical.
Oh no.
Just one.
It's okay, it's cement.
Yeah. Edit the video, right? I thought we fixed this. Okay, talk about the parking lot.
The parking lot. There were just people hanging out in the parking lot. And I cannot believe my parents let me go either, because it was totally shady.
I used to have to get dropped off around the corner. I would have to lie to my parents when I would go to house things and things like that.
My parents probably didn't know most of the time that I was going to shows.
Yeah,
they thought I was
drop me off
just going
somewhere
to Dia's house
Exactly.
to spend the night.
Either to a friend's house, or I'd say I'm going to this thing at the high school, and then I would get picked up at the high school and go to somewhere else.
Yeah.
It was a pretty good strat. And the irony is, and you might relate, I wasn't even, in my mind, I wasn't really being that bad. I usually wasn't, at the time, especially in high school, I really wasn't actually.
No,
Most of the
I
other
wasn't
events,
being bad.
People were drinking, and I wasn't even really drinking at the
No.
time. And so, but yet I was still having to sneak out just to go to see music, which is kind of a weird,
Yeah.
but I feel like you have that's notion of the lack of safety and it's what's going on? It's a house, and I'd come home smelling like cigarettes, but I was like, I wasn't smoking.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So it wasn't until I was in Atlanta when all that happened, and then I moved. My parents got a divorce, which helped with my show going because they were distracted, and I was just like, "See ya." But we moved, and I went to UNC. And I was working at a pizza place, and Mac, who became my partner in crime, was working there also. He had already been in a few bands. He had started bands in high school, and I was not impressed. but my roommate. This is I'm sorry, this is a boring story. Her dad worked for Budweiser. And so she had a Budweiser branded bass guitar that her dad had given her. And she had no idea how to play it. And she was talking one time to Mac about that in Peppers. And he was like, well, I'll come over and show you how to play it. We can make up some songs or whatever. And so he came to my house and, with the idea that he was going to teach Sue how to play her guitar, or her bass. And it wound up being me instead, because Sue had no propensity for it whatsoever. And that's how it started. And I really didn't either, and I really didn't want to. I was terrified. I was like totally an introvert, and playing in front of people really, it made my face tingle. It made me have like tunnel vision.
But you kept doing it.
I kept doing it.
What do you think kept you? It clearly was the right idea, but what at the time do you think?
Peer pressure. I think it was Mac. Like he was like, "No, you got to keep doing it. You got to do this," and I was like, "Okay," but it was terrible. I hated it. I really hated it.
Was that first band that you're talking about? Was that Chunk or Super Chunk?
No.
Or did you had a pre?
We had another band before that with this guy Jonathan Newman. And, I think we knew, people just form bands all the time in Chapel Hill. I think it happens everywhere, where you're just like, oh, we're having beers, let's be in a band tonight. And our friends want us to play at a show next week at their house. Let's see, we have to name our band. I know, our band is called A Careful Workman is the Best Safety Device. And that was actually the name of our band. And so we played a couple house parties, and I hated it. But I kept doing it. And we went through a couple different bands, and eventually we wound up with some of the founding members of Chunk, Super Chunk. And around the same time, there was just so much going on in the music scene in the Triangle area, which is where I live. There's 3 towns close together, Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill. They are separate towns. They don't all run together. It's not Raleigh, Durham. It's Raleigh and Durham and Chapel Hill. Our Raleigh, Durham is the airport. Get that straight.
That's why we're so confused about it.
Yes, it's very confusing. But it's a perfect ecosystem for a music scene to grow, because there's at least one university in each town, lots of young kids, good college radio stations, good venues in each town, and wait, why did I go there?
Talking about the early days of pre-Super Chunk.
Right.
Playing in bands and things.
But so there was so much going on between the 3 towns. We had so many friends who were in bands, and they would be in a band for a while, and they might open for national bands or international bands that would tour through and play in one of the towns. But then, that was the end of it. They would play a few shows and then just sort of peter out, because there was nowhere to go with it. Nobody would ever find out who that band was beyond that town, except for maybe, the band that they opened for. And so we thought, we need to start documenting these bands somehow and give them sort of the material to get out of here and go places by, making a tape or a 7-inch that we can sell, that they can take on tour with them and sell to people, or that we can sell to stores or distributors around the region, or eventually, we graduated to around the United States and then had some international distribution, but it was really small scale and DIY.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So many labels of our eras started to sort of essentially, like you put it, document a local scene, document something happening rather than promote. It was almost like document. Mm-hmm. Promotion then became a goal. It's interesting to hear you put it that way. Before we get, I think now we skipped the step. We went right to merge growing, but
Sorry.
no, it's okay. But with these bands that eventually became Superchunk, at what point did it become something that you felt like you wanted other people to hear? Like it went from being kind of like you and your friends screwing around, the pizza place drinking beers, to like, I actually want to record this and I want other people should hear this, or was there a moment, or was there
Mac felt like that a long time before I did. Like our first album, I think we recorded like a year after we became a band, and he had already gone back. When we started the band, he was on hiatus for a year from Columbia University. So he was living in Chapel Hill for a year and then went back to school. And then at some point he came back down and was like, okay, let's record an album. And I was like, what? And we went and recorded an album in one day. We put it to tape, did the vocals, mixed it one day. Or maybe 3 days. No, maybe it was 3. I can't remember. But it was really, really fast.
This was the self-titled album? This was the
self-titled
7-inch.
album. It is so bad. Like, when I listen to it, I can hear all these flubs and mistakes that I'm making because I barely knew the songs because he wasn't even in town. Like, we never played.
But then it became a huge success, right? It led to labels wanting to sign you, and right?
That first record? I don't know. Like, I guess it did.
You had a record deal, right?
Well, we had a record deal before we recorded this album. I think actually what made him say we need to record an album was he was friends with Gerard Cosloy, who worked at Homestead.
Still Homestead at the time, yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Which was an old record label that was really great. Dinosaur Jr. was on it.
We're the dinosaurs.
They were called Dinosaur first, and then they had to become Dinosaur Jr. He and Mac had been talking, and I think Mac thought we were going to get signed to Homestead, but it turned out that Gerard left Homestead and started Matador Records together with this other guy, Chris Lombardi. But so before we had even recorded a record, we had put out a few 7-inch records, and Gerard liked them. And so it was time to record an album because there was somebody interested. And I don't know, it was punk rock and nobody cared, like it didn't matter that it wasn't perfect or polished. It was just, it captured something that Gerard found acceptable to release as a record.
But at some point in that era, and I think you're being a bit facetious or too humble. I mean, that first record was a pretty seminal record for people. Maybe you still look at it that way, and I understand it's like your early stuff, but people heard that, and I mean,
the standards at the time were different.
That's also true. But there was interest. Was there interest from majors yet? When did that type of stuff start
that
happening?
happened. Okay, so our first record I think came out in '90, and then we put out a second record.
That's what Steve Albini recorded the
We
No
recorded
Pocky record, right?
No Pocky for Kitty, our second record, in '92, I think. And we recorded it in '91, and maybe it came out in early '92. When did that Nirvana record come out?
91 was Nevermind. And
Okay, Nevermind. When Nevermind came out, that began this sort of weird feeding frenzy where all the majors were like, "Oh, this underground like rock is something that we all need to get in on because look at Nirvana," and so we did have a few dinners.
Yeah, someone must have come to you and offered you maybe not on paper, but they must have offered you money and offered you a deal.
Yeah, they did. They did. But we knew we didn't want to do it because there was also this back in that time. The attitude towards success was negative. Basically, like even Nirvana having this great success with Nevermind. I mean, you were kind of like, oh, good for them, they deserve it. But also you were like, they sold out, man. And back then, like nobody would ever, no self-respecting punk rocker would ever have a song, put a song in a commercial, like allow their song to be in a commercial, because that was selling out. That was like compromising your I guess the definition of that is you're compromising your punk rock principles for money. You weren't going to do that, because then nobody would respect you anymore because punk rock was just sort of this, like, regarded as this political thing.
Yeah, where do you think those values came from for you? Like this, because I mean, you grew up listening, like Adam and the Ants and bands that signed to big labels and got really big, and Prince, and I guess also the Bad Brains. But where do you think those values? I was asking these questions to Steve also. Like, where did you get these ideas that you wanted to not be like the bands you grew up listening to, but I wanted to reject, the idea of turning down a major label offer, being in a band, playing with your friends, and if someone coming from a major label saying, "I want to put out," that must have been very tempting, and the idea of turning that down is a real values, based decision. I'm just curious what started to inform those values for you.
I think it's hard to say. I mean, I just absorbed it from the people I was around and the bands I was seeing, and you would see this pattern over and over again whenever a band did get signed to a major label, that they would change into something else under the pressure that they felt from the label to be more commercial or be more successful. And they would change and usually break up or get dropped by the label, and then they were like untouchables. And I think that was a big part of it. But also, I think a lot of the political side of it came from, bands, a lot of the bands that we knew from DC, like Minor Threat, like those bands in that scene, it was very much political, and a rejection of corporate America, pretty much.
Yeah, it's just fascinating because again, a lot of my values were informed by the values of previous generations, but it seems like your generation of punk and underground was part of what set those values, because the generation before, a lot of the early punk was on major labels, and Sex Pistols and Ramones and like Dead Boys, they were on bigger Blondie. They were so it's like it was almost in your era that people were setting these ideals for my era, but it's just interesting. I talked to Steve about that too when he was here, and his answer was sort of similar to yours. It was just like in the air, but it had to have come from somewhere, and so it's just interesting something I'm always just interested in trying to get to, because for me, I can sort of point it came from y'all, but don't know where you guys got it from.
Yeah. Well, if you think about what was going on in politics at the time, I think that is a big part of it. It was the Reagan era. And it was it was an unhappy time.
You think it was part of just rejecting power and rejecting like the man, so to speak?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, definitely.
That's interesting. So it might be a good time to now get back to Merge. So during this time, you were making these records for Matador, and it sounds like you kind of did that just because you were offered a record with another label, they were going to pay for it, but you were also growing Merge, and at a certain point, you left Matador and started putting out your own records. So is that because something had Merge kind of grown to a point where you wanted to work with it, or did your attitudes kind of change towards letting somebody else, release your records other than yourself? Or what kind of informed that decision to then go back to your own label there?
When Matador first wanted to put out our records, we were in no position to put out full-length records. We were, hand assembling everything in my living room, and it was all in boxes under my bed. And we didn't have a distribution system in place, nor did we feel like we could do what it would take to promote a full-length album. And then by the time our deal with Matador was up, we had Corey Rusk from Touch and Go had come and started and said, "I like what you guys are doing. I really like all these 7 inches you're putting out. Would you be interested in Touch and Go doing a manufacturing and distribution deal with you so that you can do full-length records. And that enabled us to transition to doing full-length records. And actually, before we were done with our deal with Matador, we put out a compilation of all our 7 inches on an album through Touch and Go. So we had already put our toe in the water before we left Matador, and then also put out a Palvo record. And we realized we could do, with the help of Touch and Go, we were able to do it. And yeah, I mean, talking about Touch and Go, I talk about it as if you guys would know who they are. Some of you do and some of you don't, but they don't exist anymore because Corey, at some point, I can't remember, maybe it was like 2006, after the digital age began, he saw the writing on the wall and he said, I'm not going to be able to survive as a record label and manufacturer and distributor anymore, because what's coming down the pike is not going to be sustainable for record labels and for the physical side of it, which is what he was in. He didn't touch the digital side.
Was again, we're getting off the rails, which is good, but was he right? Was he wrong?
Probably.
He might have been right. Like when
he might have been right.
You know,
it's getting harder and harder.
Yeah, he might have left a little earlier than he needed to, but I
Yeah.
mean, sometimes I do think of when he might have been right. Like he might have just sometimes you do see the writing on the walls, but you don't see how long it's going to take to how much runway you have. But it was a big deal when Touch and Go sort of they stopped kind of in a prime moment. I think there were other things that
maybe it was more like
him,
2008.
Yeah, but they had done TV on the radio. Like they had some. They didn't stop like when they petered out. They kind of had some big success, and I think he did just lose interest. It's a little alarming when you remind me like that he sort of saw what was coming with all the digital stuff. But let's get back to the positive stuff and to Merge. Do you think you kind of learned from being on Matador too a little bit, like, oh, here's what a label does for their artist, now I can do this? Was there some sense of like seeing what another label does for you as an artist and trying to?
I learned from them what you should do and things that they did or didn't do that I wanted to do the opposite way. They didn't do much in the way of accounting, which is something that I don't know if it's generally better these days or not, but classically, indie record labels never accounted to their bands. And I just thought well, that's ridiculous. Like, why would any band want somebody putting out their records who doesn't then turn around and share information and pay them for that? But that was pretty normal at the time. Like getting accounting out of Matador was like squeezing blood out of a stone. But I did it. And basically I was like in my partnership with Mac, like he's sort of the like, hey everybody kind of guy, and I'm the like doing the accounting, calling the distributors, making the packages, and he's Mr. Public Face. And that's the way I wanted it, because I'm the introvert. So to me, like accounting was just this natural thing you had to do, and we've always been great about doing that.
Yeah, and I think I've said before. I think that's Steve and I talked about this too. It's one of the key functions of a record label. Like that's half.
You're a business.
Yeah, it's half of what you have to do. But you're right. I think a lot of punk labels got away with it before streaming, because there were ways to sort of approximate accounting. I'm not going to account, but I'm going to give you 20% of the pressing each time, and that's sort of like, then I don't have to account. I gave, there were these like approximate ways, and then when streaming and digital stuff came, you actually had to do math and account and keep track of things in a way that you.
We started our label though, way
Yeah.
Way
did
before.
Did Matador even give you like a free copies percent? I'm saying there were ways labels tried to like
60 records or something,
just at one time, not like ever pressing. So that's, I'm sure a lot has changed over there since then, because they've grown a lot. So hopefully they count.
They probably have to.
They probably have to.
They probably have an accountant who's on their
Yeah,
on their
they
ass.
eventually. But I'm just.
Yeah.
It's just. I think a lot of labels struggled with that because it's not. It's a whole separate duty than you're used to when you're like, I'm just trying to listen to music and help promote it, and then it's like, oh, I have to keep track of stuff. And I
Yeah.
think there used to be here, just take some records, just take some, and you can't do that when things become digital. You have to actually account because you just have money coming in and you have streams and you have you know now how many revenue sources there are. You have to kind of like keep track of, and it's
Gotten harder and harder.
it's awful. It's one of the least enjoyable parts of running a label, but it's the most important, you
Right.
know. And so, so it's interesting. So you left Matador, and then Merge probably started growing since you sort of brought Superchunk back and started learning things as a label.
And Polvo too. I mean, Polvo were a band that people cared about a lot at the time.
Were they your first? Did that feel like your first big kind of hit, or?
Yeah, and it felt good to put out an album by a band that wasn't our band. You know, it felt like, oh, we're a real record label. We're not just putting out our stuff. So yeah, that felt like a success, and people were into them. And though, you know, back then, like what, you know, we sold like 2,000 records. And that felt huge.
It was a smaller scene because that 2000 was actually reaching like an entire. That was a major record in a community. The community was just a lot smaller, you know. And so yeah, it is interesting because that band that just did the reissues have just come out. Like that band still has like a major legacy, you know, to this day. I think one of the most, for me at least as an outsider, I think one of the more special things about Merge is that you've managed over the 30-year stretch to kind of maintain like a true label community, as opposed to just some of these other labels from that era that became more of like a brand or more of just like a, you know, yeah, I guess a brand, and kind of devolved in that sense. And I feel like Merge really has done an excellent job of like maintaining a community of artists. And I'm just wondering if that's something, like, you know, maybe it's not conscious, but like what types of things you think you did that helped maintain such a community, as opposed to just like, this is a brand and we're going to put it on things and it's going to be successful, like a lot of big indie labels of that same era kind of become.
I'm not, like, it feels like less of a community to me than it used to. But I think that it may feel more like a community, partly because, or like there's some link between all the bands, without it being that they all sound the same, or they're in the same genre, merely because we choose to work with them because Mac and I like them. It's based on two people's musical taste that has evolved over time, but it's still like that links them all together. But somehow, like, you know, when we started, they were all people that we hung out with all the time and would come over and put 7 inches together on the sofa and eat pizza. But now people are more spread around the world, and they aren't people we necessarily get to hang out with as much as we would like to. And, you know, I used to always say that, like, we're not going to sign anybody to Merge that we wouldn't want to be friends with. And there's some people on the label, there have been at various times that, like, now I'm like, I don't know, we never got to be friends. You know?
And I think that's just part of growth, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah. It's harder to have the time to like really get in the trenches with people, but also when they're remote, it's harder to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think from the outside, I'll just say it has always felt like you have your artists kind of, you know, not always sonically, but they do seem to tie together into what feels like a nice community. It might be some of the events, you know, the annual or every couple of year events, anniversary things you do, and the different ways you run the label. It does always feel like you have like a tight knit group. So,
well, I think there's a lot of mutual respect among our artists, and we do every 5 years we have an anniversary thing, and that's to me that's the most important part of those anniversary events. Well, no, not the most, but one of the important things is that all of the bands that come and play get to be together and meet each other and hang out together and feel more like a community. But also, magically, these events are really small. We usually do them just at the Cat's Cradle, which is the venue in Chapel Hill that's been there forever. And the capacity is 700 people. So we can't sell more than 700 tickets to this thing. And actually, we can only sell like 600 tickets because everybody that works at Merge is there and all the bands are there. So it's 600 people, the bands and us, for 5 days in the same room together. And by the end of it, you feel like you've been at summer camp with these people. And everybody's in love and hugging each other, and they've had drunk, sloppy moments, and they've had hungover breakfasts together, and it's great. It's amazing, and it ties us all together as a community.
No, I mean that's great, and I think one of the other things is, and that probably is partially because you and Max still run it, as you also know a lot of labels that have been around as long and scaled as big as you are no longer run by the people that kind of started them, or they have other people kind of in there that are running them. And I feel like, at least the way you talk about it, you still very much approach it with that same punk label mentality that you did when you started it, but you've kind of managed to scale it up pretty damn big, right? Or have you had to sort of make some compromises along the way where you felt like old me wouldn't have done this, or if you felt like you've been able to maintain this is really what I wanted to kind of to do with the label, or scaling it up as big as you've gotten, it must have had some challenges, or?
Oh, well, let's see. I'm trying to figure out how to approach this one.
It's a brain buster.
But one of our first big successes was this Magnetic Fields album called 69 Love Songs. And after we put that record out, which was, it seemed like this ridiculous idea because it was 69 songs. It wouldn't even fit on a CD, we had to, it was a multi-CD set. And we thought, nobody is going to pay $36 for a record. That's crazy. This is nuts. We're only going to make 1,000 or some really little number. And then it turned out people got really excited about it, and we kept having to make more. And after that, we were able to move to Durham and buy a building. It was, which real estate in Durham was cheap at the time. Don't get me wrong, but we had enough money that we could put a down payment on a building and move into a real office, and not some weird house we were renting in Chapel Hill. So that was a big upgrade. And then around a little bit before that, we had put out this Neutral Milk Hotel record called In the Airplane Over the Sea. And immediately there wasn't a huge impact from that record. But it grew a lot over time and has become this sort of really super steady source of income for us. And I feel like it's kind of like the Houses of the Holy, Led Zeppelin record of a certain generation, that every college kid has to discover this record and spend time with it because it blows your mind, and it connects to you emotionally in a way, it gets its hooks in you. But then after that, this friend of ours, Howard Billerman, sent us this record. He was this guy from Montreal who used to come to Superchunk shows all the time and follow us around. He was kind of annoying. Sometimes. But great guy. But he sent us this record, and he was like, I'm playing drums in this band, and I recorded them, and they're really great. And I'm not just saying that because I'm playing with them. And it was, a burned CD of the Arcade Fire. And, we passed it around the office, and it was like, we had it for like 3 months, and like, we're just like, yeah, it's good. I don't know. Like, I keep remembering that song. I don't know. What do you think? Blah, blah, blah. And like, this is a problem that we have. Decision making. We're very slow. We like to really process things and think about it. And, after 3 months, we were finally like, okay, yeah, yes, we should do this. This is a good band. Let's put out this record. And we told Howard, and Howard told them. And in the meantime, they had almost signed to another label in Canada, which would have meant we weren't going to do it. But they hadn't signed the paper yet. I mean, how evil is that? That is so bad. But so they were like, okay, we haven't actually done the deal. So yes, we'd rather be on Merge. And it again changed Merge history and led to us having to scale up, because that Arcade Fire record, Funeral, again, like, blew all our expectations out of the water. We were like, there's a buzz on this band. I think we're going to sell 4,000 of these. And of course, they had this really elaborate packaging with gold foil on the cover. And whenever you put gold foil on something, like, first you have to do the regular print job. It has to dry. And then you have to put the gold foil on, and it has to dry in a single layer. You can't lay anything on top of it, because then it'll stick to the other ones, and like, it takes forever.
Yeah, at the time you're like, God damn it, all this for 4,000 CDs or whatever. And like,
well, no, I mean, first round, great, fine. We had time to make it, but then like, when the demand was insane, we could not keep up. We kept making more, and like, it would take a month to get another pressing done because of the print job. But it turned out to be a very successful record. And then that band, kept growing, and we had to hire more people. And actually, like, they at first we had a direct relationship with them, and it was good. And then they got a manager who I was not a fan of, who really put the pressure on us to basically cut Touch and Go out. And then at a certain point, like, after we had been working with them for a while, we realized, like, okay, well, look at how much money we're paying Touch and Go to basically, like, we're doing all the press, we're doing all the promotion. They're just like selling this to distributors and stores who are begging them for it. It's ridiculous that we're paying them this many dollars to do that. We can't do it anymore when we have all this staff we have to pay. And so it led to the separation of us and Touch and Go. And that's like totally a growing pain situation. It was horrible. Because we loved them, and we had really great relationships with so many people there.
So while all that was going on, especially before that moment, when things were still really blowing up with them, did it still feel like you were kind of running a punk label and just got big, or did it start to feel like, wow, I'm running like kind of a big
We were running a punk label, but trying to play this game that we didn't understand at all. Like, there were commercial radio stations approaching us and going like, will the Arcade Fire come and play this for free, this radio festival thing, and then like maybe we'll put them on the radio? And we'd go, okay, and we'd say, Arcade Fire, do you want to play this show for free? And then maybe they'll put you on the radio. And they were like, no. And we're like, okay, no. And then after they got the manager, they started doing more of those things.
Free radio things. I mean, yeah, but when you start scaling up, it's weird. You start to get glimpses of this world you knew existed, but you never actually saw, and you get to see behind the curtain a little bit.
It's gross.
It's really gross, yeah. And every once in a while, you get a chance to peek in when something like bubbles up like that, and you're like, Wow, it's just as bad. It always kind of reinforces your beliefs. You're like, wow, it's just as bad as I thought it was.
Yeah,
You know,
there's a reason we said we weren't going to sign to a major label in
but there's
1992.
always a moment. There's a moment of like, maybe it's not as bad as I thought it was. Maybe let me give it. And the second you get that peak, you're like, oh no, it's exactly what everyone says it is. It's exactly as bad as I thought it was.
Yeah, or worse.
And it kind of, then it reinforces you. I'm going to work harder. Hopefully, obviously the label kept kind of going strong since then. But
and then like the Arcade Fire won a Grammy. But
Did
that
you
was
go?
weird too. I did not go. I was like, whatever. That is not my scene.
Did Matt go?
Yeah,
Okay.
he was totally into it. I have this weird rejecting thing, like about like, I don't want your recognition. I don't want your accolades. Take them away from me. They are impure.
Where did that getting back to these questions of like informing values, where do you think that came from?
I don't know. I think it's me being a contrarian in a lot of ways.
I mean, I think there's so much about that that's like punk rock, from this like.
It's a rejection
But it's just
of
interesting.
the man.
Yeah. And I remember I too, and you probably too, as you've gotten older, we're always told you might like grow out of those ideals by older people. Like you'll get older and you'll want to do all this stuff, and I still haven't. It sounds like you haven't either.
I do.
I still don't want to do that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I don't know
I
where
still
it came.
think the Grammys are. Now I'm actually a member of the Academy.
Because of the nomination or the win.
Well, no. All you have to do is like have your name associated with a certain number of records in some way, like either as a record label, or a recording engineer, or an artist, and then you can pay to be a member of the Academy. You have the great honor of paying. Wait, what?
It's just basically pay to win.
Yeah.
No,
well,
not even pay to win.
No,
Pay to lose.
Pay to lose. Yeah, it's
pay to
true.
not get nominated even.
And so now
A lot to
can,
win.
as a member of the Academy, I am allowed to vote on who wins the Grammys. And like me and I don't know who else, but mostly I don't know who any of these artists are, and I don't give a crap. But like, I asked my daughter, I'm like, she's 15. I'm like, okay, who do you think? Cardi B or Ariana? And
And
because
that's her best rock album.
no, that's Kings of the Stone Age or something, right? Yeah.
To get back on track.
I'm sorry. But anyway, like now the older I get and the more I get, like I'm like, maybe I should see what this is all about. The more I'm like, oh yeah, my instincts were right. This is crap.
I've had that same thing. I mean, I've also been doing this since I was in college, just kind of like you when I started. So I just didn't used to get invited to things. So I would tell myself I didn't want to go, but I secretly like wasn't invited. But then as I started getting invited, I realized, no, I actually didn't want to go. And now it kind of I used to be like, am I just kidding myself?
Yeah, like the popular kids in 6th grade.
Yeah, I used to pretend that
They
I
would
didn't
have
want to be
parties,
popular.
and you were like, oh, I wish I was invited.
I'd pretend I didn't want to go, but I wasn't invited. But I always wondered, do I actually not want to go? And then I found out, I actually
Once
didn't
you're
want to
there,
go.
you're like, these guys are losers.
Sometimes I got invited to those popular kid parties for one reason or another, and they were awful, and I never went again. And it feels like that with the industry, too. It's like I used to be like, oh, I can't be in this. And then they're like, do you want to come join this? I'm like, I'll try it. And then I'm gone.
And then you realize, like, immediately, it's a popularity contest. Like, seriously, nobody from the Grammys is here, right? Like, it is a popularity contest. Like, you go down the list, and the people that win, there's too many things to vote on. You cannot possibly listen to it all, right? Like, and you just go, okay, I've heard of this one. And I don't hate them, so yes. And, that's how it goes. And that's how people win. Yeah. And when the Arcade Fire won, I don't really know how that happened.
People had heard of them. They had a big year, for real. That's probably what, like, more people had heard of them.
But it was the people who were in the Grammy, like, board. Like, they're all like 60.
True. So let's talk about some of these industry things now, because this is actually where I wanted to. We both talked about wanting to get here eventually in our conversation. It took us a while, but we
Sorry.
actually met. We
It's
met
my
through.
fault.
We met through a committee on sustainability in the industry, and I know that's been something you've been really focused on recently, is environmental and eco-friendly and sustainability issues in the industry. So I was kind of curious. Two things. One, when did you start thinking about those things within the music industry? Because I know, and I'm sure it relates to when you started thinking of that outside of it. And then two, what kind of things are you trying to do and thinking about at Merge right now to sort of work on that action?
I've always been kind of a hippie. Thanks to Jimmy Carter, I think.
Atlanta, Georgia at least. Yeah.
Jimmy Carter. When he was president, he had some really good messaging. You guys missed out if you were too young to have been around then.
Too young or not alive?
I mean, not alive. So young you weren't alive yet, or
That goes for me
conceived,
too,
or even like your parents maybe. But thrift and friendliness to the climate often go hand in hand. Like, largely they do. Like, if you're trying to conserve resources, you are also conserving the climate. Conserving resources is saving money. And so Merge started on a shoestring budget, and we did everything on a small scale, and we didn't waste anything. And so we started out that way. And as we got bigger, we wasted more and more. As there was definitely this period in the physical side of the industry where we were told by our distributor, well, basically, you have to ship 33% more records than you want to sell in order to sell those records. You're going to have 33% of the records are going to be trash. They're going to come back to you at the end. They're going to be returns, and then you're going to have to destroy them or just have them sitting in your warehouse and pay tax on them. So as we got bigger, that became more of a problem. Like, being environmentally friendly gets harder and harder the bigger a business you become. But we've always tried to be mindful, and we've been thinking about it a lot more recently, and started a few years ago by going okay, this 180-gram vinyl thing, that's actually totally bogus. It doesn't sound better. It just feels heavier. And so it feels better. It feels more like a plate, a real thing, and not like a flimsy piece of plastic. So the problem with manufacturing 180-gram vinyl is you're using more petroleum product, A. B, then you have to ship a heavier thing around multiple times, and it uses more fuel. So we're okay, we shouldn't do that anymore. And then at some point we also were okay, jewel cases, maybe not so great. They're made of plastic, they crack all the time. And we transitioned to doing digipacks, and then more of these just cardboard sleeve things.
We're split on these ones. We've talked about that.
Yeah. And recently we've been experimenting with not shrink wrapping things that we sell directly to consumers, to our mail order, or to companies where they're going to ship them directly to the end user, and it's not going to sit on a store shelf and get beat up. But these are all small things,
Well, no, but they're small things, but they're things that are actually within our control as an industry, right? It's true. It's a drop in the bucket compared to the sort of global industrial processes, but those are much harder for you or I to directly affect. Like we can vote in certain
Right.
ways, we can go in the streets with a sign, we can give money to certain places, but this is an area where label owners can actually affect
Yeah.
change within it. So I think it's really important that you are
Yeah.
doing these things. They might feel small, but they're not actually that small. Like
Right.
we are an industry.
And
you
it
know?
opens your eyes up to like thinking about every step of the process and thinking like, okay, how can this be better? And manufacturers also, some of them are very responsible and are more attuned to waste within their facility or using materials that are not toxic to the people who have to make the materials, like lead-free PVC. It is PVC, right?
Yeah, PVC plastic.
I don't know, like there's you can get super micro about it, and really at every level there's stuff you can do to make it better, and we're trying to do it all as much as we can, in spite of the fact that, like, unfortunately, a lot of the time, doing the thing that's right for the climate is a more expensive thing to do, which usually, which means you're either going to have a smaller profit margin or you have to charge more for the records, which is hard right now at this point where there's a lot of compression happening on the whole music industry thanks to streaming, where people are making records and making less money back from selling them, streaming them.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I personally find streaming to be like so toxic to the industry in a number of ways, both in what you're talking about with how it's compressing your margins, but I actually also find the format, people seem to see it as being very eco-friendly, but I've always seen
That's what I thought at first.
Yeah, I've always seen it as, but when you start really thinking about it, it actually is very toxic. Like it's essentially you can call it a disposable listen instead of a stream, because that's essentially what's happening. Like you're burning energy with each listen, whereas before you were putting the energy in one time, sometimes in the 60s, and then passing it off from person to person to person, or the 70s or 80s. Like when I get rid of a record, I don't throw it in the garbage.
An LP, a physical record.
Yeah, if it's an LP or a CD, but when I get rid of it, I don't take it and throw it in the garbage and send it to a landfill. I take it actually to a community record store who resells it to another community member in their collection, who then, when they're done, sells it back to a community record store and puts it into the, and you're actually like doing a lot for your community and for music, but also you're fully recycling that product. And then when I stream something, I'm just burning energy, but it's not I don't see it in front of me. It's just happening in a facility, in a data center somewhere else, every single time I listen to it. And then the devices that I'm playing it on, you're supposed to get a new one every year or two, and they're made of all kinds of toxic stuff.
I.e. your phones.
Yeah, your phones, or the things you had before your phones that they said, you don't need this anymore. Okay, this was a $600 device, top of the line, and now I don't need it anymore because I have another $1,000 top of the line device. It's not that top of the line if you need another one 2 years later, and it's got all these toxic things in it. The headphones, with the batteries, that they now make it so you can't recharge them. Once the rechargeable batteries die, you need a whole new ear pod. You need a whole new wireless headset. That didn't used to happen with the old headsets. They weren't powered.
I didn't realize you couldn't replace the batteries.
No, I mean you might be able to do some, like MacGyver might be able to replace the batteries, but I don't know if like you can't just take them out and put them back in again.
Right.
Because they don't want you to replace the batteries. It's kind of a waste industry. It reminds me again a lot of like styrofoam cups and plastic forks.
Like phones are the new styrofoam cups.
Yeah, and music listens are like the new plastic forks. Instead, like an LP is a metal fork. Yeah, you still need, everyone's like, well, it's physical. Yeah, you still need to buy a physical fork. You still need, at some point, you need a water bottle, but you don't need to get a disposable water bottle. So an LP is a one-time purchase of the music, and a stream is every time you're burning energy. Every time you're transferring that to and from your phone and your headphones. And I think I think it's being framed in a way that it's supposed to be greener. And it's destroying the environment, but then it's also, to make things worse, also destroying our industry. It's like doing two things. It's now also making it harder for you to compete in that greener physical world.
And more importantly, making it harder for artists to be able to afford to spend time and money recording albums
Yeah,
and have the luxury of being able to be paid at all for their time.
and live. Like you were
And
able
live.
you were able to have children and have a family, and if you were in a
Well, I was
streaming-
in a band and running a record label.
Yeah, but if you were in a band and running a label and a stream and it
Now?
wasn't now, you might not be able to have
No.
the luxury of having that time it takes to take the time off to do that.
Yeah.
It's artists are deprived they're not luxury. It's deprived some of the basic elements of life because their income has to come from touring.
Mm-hmm.
And soon these companies will come looking for a piece of. They'll find a way to take the money out of touring from the artists too. I firmly believe that if people aren't vigilant, because there will be tech companies coming to figure out ways to take that side too, and there already are some working on it, and it's kind of dismal thinking about it, and then thinking about that it's also then kind of leading to bankrupting the environment at the same time. it's kind of. Streaming is, I think, a much more toxic thing than people want to talk about. And
How do we address this issue?
it's a good question.
How do we save the planet from
I
streaming?
think a lot of it starts with some of these discussions that I've been talking about this more and more publicly and with other people. And I think these narratives have to get to consumers. But the truth is, it's really hard to stop people from using water bottles and plastic forks, and the truth
and
is
plastic bags.
A lot of that comes through how they stop plastic bags. New York is banning them. How are they stopping water bottles? Cities are banning them. How are they going to, and regulation. And that's another problem with streaming. I talked about with that earlier today. Radio, because it was through the public airwaves, was regulated. You couldn't have payola.
Okay.
Spotify's deregulated. It's not radio, so you can have payola. You can do all these things that it's skirting regulation as well.
Right. Well, that's another issue.
Sorry, yeah,
You're jumping issues here. What if it would take federal level regulation to, all the energy has to be green somehow, renewable energy. The people who make phones there needs to be a requirement that hardware is supported until it dies.
Yeah, they can't change the ports every,
Yeah, they can't be forcing people to buy new phones by making the phone just not usable after 3 years. What else? I
think regulating certain pay structures, so you can have artists that can sustain, enforcing antitrust, right? So the irony is some of these laws we actually have, anti-competitive business practice laws and things, but they're not actually enforced.
Not being applied
and
to
so it's enforcing
streaming.
They're not applied to most tech companies.
Those.
Google's allowed to get as big as it wants. Amazon's allowed to get as big as it wants. But that's not in the law. It's just not being. And so some of this comes.
So you're talking about that's antitrust law.
Antitrust law would help, breaking these companies up. Stricter environmental laws, like you said, keeping devices so they can't be built to be thrown away every year.
Mm-hmm. Or there has to be a requirement that they're recycled, turned back in, and actually usable in some way.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, unfortunately, it's hard for it to be consumer driven because.
No, it can't be.
People are given an option. Do you want the free, cheap thing, or do you want to pay more? And some people can afford to pay more, but a lot of people can't.
People won't choose that.
And they won't choose it. And so I think it has to, these really massively pro-social things, unfortunately, have to be top down in some way, either regulation or from these companies deciding they're actually going to take a stand and do something for the climate. And that does scare me. That's who we're looking to. We're looking to our federal government, and we're looking to the CEOs of tech companies. And that's who's going to be able to save us. But that's also, again, why what few things you can change are in our own corner.
Yeah.
We won't be we can end on a happier note. We had to get here.
It's funny, streaming early on, a couple of years ago, I thought okay, so I'm going to stream this record that is in my collection over there. I'm going to play this X record off of Spotify because I paid for that record so long ago. They're not getting any more money if I'm playing that old record. But if I stream it, then they get Something, like a part of a penny.
Yeah, but it's interesting. It's a perfect example. A lot of people that use plastic spoons, I have metal spoons like 2 drawers over.
Yeah.
And they order takeout food, and they're like, "Oh, it came with the plastic one." All like,
Yeah.
you have a spoon in the house.
Yeah.
And I think it's some of it's just attitude changes and remembering, thinking about the ramifications. And yeah, it's a scam. It's like, oh, you bought thousands of, again, for a younger generation that did not buy thousands of, records and CDs and things, it's a little different. But for the generation coming in, it's like, you just bought hundreds of CDs, maybe thousands if you had a deep record collection. Throw them all away. Here's the iPod. Like, why were you throwing 1,000 things away, and to rebuy them all it was kind of a scam. It was creating even more waste. And I'm not even really sure how much easier some of this stuff was, and they say it's easier. Some of the stuff wasn't even that much more convenient.
It's capitalism.
It is capitalism.
The economy must keep growing.
Yeah.
We must keep buying things.
That's, I think, the best. There's two ways to grow. You can either innovate and create new things, or if you can't, you can just convince people to buy things again. And I feel like this is that lower level. It's like, well, I don't have any new ideas, so let's sell them this again. But selling someone something again kind of just means turning the old thing into waste. And that wouldn't have been as much of a problem if we didn't realize that all that waste we were making was making the planet uninhabitable. I think that was this realization that people had in the 70s, that wait a minute, all this waste means we can't live here anymore. So we have a choice. We can either scale up to infinity, but then not be able to live here anymore, or we can have some level of sustainability where we can create just enough to live and not too much that we kill each other off. And I think we're still actually fighting that struggle right now.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, we'll go somewhere later before we end, so apologies.
All right, let's go there.
We started with Mutter in the prison, so so it didn't start. You started it dark. But let's talk about success, especially in this current era. But you've had a 30-year career in music. Did you ever have to work other than your cafe? You've had to just do one job, or did you ever have to work a non-pizza type?
Yes. I kept for the first 10 years probably that we had Merge Records, Mac and I did not pay ourselves a salary. It was a labor of love entirely, and we had jobs. We found jobs that would allow us to leave town for weeks at a time and come back and still keep our jobs. We were lucky. It was a college town, so it was that kind of economy. And I don't remember exactly when I quit working at Kinko's, but it really didn't occur to me when we started these businesses that they would be businesses that would be around this long, or businesses that I could ever live off of. And I feel really fortunate that that's the case. And I think in a weird way, the fact that we grew these businesses so slowly and without the goal of success, that it enabled them to succeed, strangely enough, that because it happened organically, it could happen in the right way and not collapse on itself. Does that make sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense, and I think it is one of the keys to being, so successful. Is you sort of slow and steady wins the race. Classic classic tale.
And I think a lot of people at various points have not thought that way. There were people who started labels around the same time as us in Chapel Hill who had more money and had loftier goals and tried to go for big stuff faster, and they lasted about 2 years and then they were gone. And there's definitely been bands that I've known who seemed as that as soon as they signed to a record label, they quit their job, and I was just like, you what? What do you think? How are you going to do that? That doesn't make any sense. you got an advance and you're just going to live off that for the rest of your life? Like, no, it doesn't work like that. But I don't know. This is something that, like, I think there was a period in the music industry when Apple started selling downloads that it changed the music industry a lot. Like, we went from having to pay to manufacture things and then go through this whole system to sell them, like promote them, distribute them, and then actually get them sold. That thing that people were paying $12 for in the store cost $5 to make, but then the distributor's taking 14%, and there's all the cost of promoting it. So really, like, you made $1 maybe off that record, and then you're splitting it with the band. So you each made 50 cents. Then Apple started selling downloads, 99 cents a song. The label gets paid 70 cents, or 66 cents, and you're splitting it with the band. And you didn't have to do anything except record and master that record. So it felt almost like free money. And there was that combined with more people having access to the internet and thereby also more access to buying downloads, it created this explosion in the music industry where all of a sudden everybody was making money, tons of money, because they didn't have to manufacture as much stuff. And it spoiled us all rotten. And people would start bands and think like, oh yeah, I am gonna be famous and I am gonna make money and I don't have to do anything else. I don't have to have a crappy job anymore. And now streaming has changed all that, and it's going back down to pre-download levels of sustainability. And I think we're all going to get a lot more punk rock again, which I think in a weird way is kind of maybe good.
Well, I think it is good, and I think that also comes down to that notion of, like, maybe rejecting streaming is going to be that next punk rock. Maybe it'll come as part of an ethos instead of part of a something for at least a certain segment. I don't know if the whole population's never ready to go that.
Well,
punk
but
rock,
hasn't that already happened in like all these people that got really into buying vinyl for a while?
They were buying them and then they were getting download codes, or they were buying them and they were still streaming it. I'm wondering if there's going to be a true rejection at some generation, or at least some niche or some subculture, which you would think would come out of punk rock, but it might come out of another genre. For this, because again, when I was buying vinyl, it was the CD era, and my subculture was rejecting CDs, and it was like, we're going to keep making vinyl. This won't even be on CD. And it's funny you mentioned that iTunes era. When that was first happening, my immediate, smart business sense was, no one's going to pay money for an MP3. We're not even going to put them up there. It seems like a huge waste.
We signed up right away.
We didn't. We were like years late, and people were like, "You're missing all this money." I'm like, no one's going to buy our record
It's
on
free
MP3.
money.
It turned out it was free money. It was a bad decision. Terrible decision. But in fact, the first deal I signed with a band in that era, I said, you can keep all the digital money. It's not going to be any real money. And luckily, because
That's what Corey did too.
Yeah. But luckily, since we don't actually official signed contracts, and everything's sort of based on like trust and friends.
Then you said, I never said that.
No, I didn't. I said, nope. I went back to them, when 2 years later I said, you know what? This is kind of like real money. I
take that back.
I didn't take it back, but I said, this is kind of like, and they said, you're right. Like we should. This wasn't and they were a band that's still on the label, and so I think, but because they didn't release, it didn't feel like money to either of us at the time. We both felt like that at the time. It felt like that was fair. So it was like, well, I'm not working for this money. You may as well take it. And to that, at the time we agreed that felt fair, and then 2 years later it did not feel fair, and so. But it's
because
just
you were promoting the records.
Yeah, and
driving people to go download them.
Yeah, but it's just funny. I couldn't believe that. So I'm wondering if there might be a culture that rejects it. But I think that's a good note to open the floor to. We've talked a lot.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. We've gone on.
They're here to hear you talk. You shouldn't
But
apologize.
only for like 45 minutes, and then they're like,
I don't know how long it's been. Probably too long.
Yeah.
People are starting to like tired and leave. So I want to thank you. This has been really, really lovely. You run an amazing business and band, and you've been doing it for 30 plus years, and I hope you think you'll keep doing it. And thank you for coming to Drexel and visiting
Sure.
the program.